Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Ever looked at the price of a steak at the grocery store and felt a little sticker shock? You are not alone. That climbing price tag isn't just random inflation. It's a sign of a massive crisis brewing on American ranches. The American cattle herd is shrinking to levels we haven't seen in over 70 years, and it's creating a perfect storm of high prices and immense pressure on our food supply. Today, we're unpacking the beef with prices, exploring the devastating drought, the unwavering demand, and the complex economics that are reshaping an iconic American industry. Let's start with a quick trip back in time. Cattle aren't even native to the Americas. The first herds, hardy longhorns, were brought by Spanish explorers in the 1500s, initially for hides and tallow, not meat. The industry as we know it exploded after the Civil War. Millions of longhorns roamed the plains of Texas, and the growing cities in the East had a huge appetite for beef. This kicked off the legendary era of the Great Cattle Drives. Cowboys moved millions of cattle along trails like the famous Chisholm Trail to railheads in Kansas, where they were shipped to big packing centers like Chicago. But the open range couldn't last forever. The late 19th century brought two game-changing inventions: barbed wire, which fenced off the plains, and refrigerated rail cars, which allowed fresh beef to travel across the country without spoiling. This era also saw a shift in the cattle themselves. The lanky longhorns were gradually replaced by British breeds like Hereford and Angus, which were much better for producing high-quality meat. The final major evolution came in the mid-20th century, with the rise of feedlots. As cities grew and surplus grain became available, this system allowed for more efficient, large-scale beef production, creating the powerhouse industry we know today. But that modern powerhouse is now facing a challenge that threatens its very foundation: the Great Drying. The primary villain in our story is a relentless, intensifying drought that has gripped the American West and the Great Plains, the heart of cattle country. Drought is not just a lack of rain, it's a multi-pronged assault on a rancher's livelihood. The most immediate effect is the decimation of pastureland. The grasses that cattle graze on simply wither and die. This leaves ranchers with two terrible, expensive choices: buy supplemental feed like hay, or sell off their cattle. This problem is compounded because the drought also makes hay and other feed grains more scarce, and therefore more expensive. Some ranchers have reported having to truck in hay from hundreds of miles away, adding staggering transportation costs to their budgets. Then there's the issue of water. Ponds dry up, streams stop flowing. Ranchers often have to start hauling water just to keep their herds alive, another major expense and logistical nightmare. The extreme heat that comes with drought also puts immense stress on the cattle, reducing their ability to gain weight and making them more vulnerable to disease. Faced with dwindling grass, scarce water, and skyrocketing feed costs, many ranchers are forced to make a painful decision: they have to cull their herds. This isn't just selling a few extra animals. It often means selling off their core breeding stock, the cows that are essential for producing the next generation of calves. This liquidation has devastating long-term consequences. It can take many years to rebuild a breeding herd once it's been downsized. The numbers from the U.S. Department of Agriculture paint a stark picture. In recent years, huge portions of the U.S. have been under severe drought. As a direct result, the rate at which beef cows were culled in 2022 and 2023 were the second and third highest, respectively, since 2011. This accelerated slaughter is the direct cause of the shrinking national herd. So just how small has the herd become? According to the USDA, the American cattle herd is the smallest it's been in decades. A recent report indicated a total inventory of just 94.2 million head. To put that in perspective, many analysts say the herd is now at its smallest size since the 1950s. The decline is especially sharp in the beef cow herd, the engine room of our beef supply. With fewer beef cows, the 2025 calf crop is also projected to be smaller. which means fewer cattle will be available for the entire supply chain for years to come. This contraction is part of a longer-term trend. Since 1980, the United States has lost well over half of all its beef cattle farms and ranches. The recent droughts have simply put that trend into overdrive. Now, the cattle industry does operate in a natural expansion and contraction pattern, known as the cattle cycle, which is tied to profitability. When profits are high, ranchers expand their herds. When they're low, they contract. But experts are calling the current situation a hypercycle because the contraction phase has been so deep and so prolonged. Several factors are making it worse. The average age of an American rancher is high, and many are choosing to retire and sell off their herds rather than face the daunting task of rebuilding. Plus, high input costs and high interest rates make it incredibly difficult for both new and existing ranchers to get the capital needed to expand their operations. Here's where things get really interesting. Despite the shrinking supply and the record-high prices that come with it, America's appetite for beef is as strong as ever. Beef remains a staple of the American diet, prized for its taste and versatility. This creates a classic economic squeeze. When a shrinking supply meets a powerful, unwavering demand, prices have nowhere to go but up. Consumers are seeing this at the grocery store every day, where the price of everything from ground beef to prime rib has hit record levels. A pound of ground beef, for example, has seen a significant price hike in just the last couple of years. In response, shoppers are getting savvy. There's been a noticeable shift towards more affordable cuts. Ground beef, in particular, has seen the strongest growth in demand as people substitute it for more expensive steaks. We're also seeing people cook more beef at home instead of dining out. And another fascinating trend is the growth of direct-to-consumer sales, with more people seeking out local farms to buy their beef, looking for quality and a connection to where their food comes from. But the fact remains, as long as demand stays this high and the herd stays this small, we can all expect to continue paying a premium for beef. While the basic equation of supply and demand is the main story, it's not the whole story. Several other factors are contributing to this complex price puzzle. One of the biggest and most controversial is consolidation within the meatpacking industry. Today, just 4 massive corporations control over 80% of the beef market. Think about that. Critics have argued for decades that this gives these companies immense power to manipulate prices. With so few buyers, ranchers have very little bargaining power and are often forced to accept whatever price is offered for their cattle. At the same time, with so little competition, these same few companies can charge higher prices to wholesalers and retailers, which are then passed on to us, the consumers. This creates a widening gap where the rancher's share of the final beef price has been declining, while the price at the supermarket keeps increasing. The Biden administration has even launched initiatives to try and promote more competition and curb what they call abusive practices by these large meat processors. On top of that, ranchers are being squeezed by inflation and soaring input costs. The price of feed, fuel for tractors, fertilizer for pastures, and new equipment have all skyrocketed, crushing profit margins and making it incredibly difficult to stay in business. And let's not forget the unique dynamics of the cattle cycle itself. It takes about 18 to 24 months for a calf to be born and grow to slaughter weight. This means production cannot react quickly to price signals. In fact, paradoxically, when prices get high, it can actually incentivize ranchers to sell more cattle now to cash in, rather than keeping female cattle for breeding. This can tighten the supply even further in the short term. Rebuilding a herd is a slow, expensive process, and it can take several years before the effects of an expansion are actually felt in the meat aisle. Finally, we have to consider global factors. The U.S. both imports and exports beef, so changes in global demand or trade policies like tariffs can ripple back and affect domestic prices. And then there are unforeseen threats, like the recent emergence of screwworm, a flesh-eating parasite, in Mexico. This led to a temporary border closure for livestock trade to protect the U.S. herd, showing just how vulnerable the industry can be to external shocks. So what does the future hold? The big question on everyone's mind is when the herd will finally start to rebuild. Most experts are forecasting that it could take several years before we see any significant increase in cattle numbers, which means beef prices are likely to stay elevated for the foreseeable future. The decision to rebuild ultimately rests in the hands of thousands of individual ranchers. A return to normal weather patterns and an end to the drought would be the single biggest catalyst for expansion. But even with good weather, the economics have to make sense. The high cost of borrowing money, market volatility, and the aging rancher population are all major hurdles. The government does offer some support. The USDA's Livestock Forage Disaster Program, for example, provides payments to help ranchers cover feed costs during a drought. But perhaps the most exciting glimmer of hope for the long-term future is the growing movement towards sustainable and regenerative ranching. These are not just buzzwords. These practices focus on actively improving soil health, using rotational grazing to make pastures more productive and drought-resilient, and reducing the overall environmental impact of cattle. Proponents argue that well-managed cattle can actually be part of the solution to climate change by helping to sequester carbon in the soil. By adopting these methods, ranchers can not only make their land more resilient for the future, but also build a more sustainable and profitable business model. The American cattle industry is truly at a crossroads. The convergence of a historic drought, a shrinking herd, and relentless demand has created a crisis that is being felt from the ranch to the dinner table. The challenges are immense, from a changing climate to deep-seated economic issues like market consolidation. Yet this is an industry defined by its resilience. From the open range to the modern feedlot, the American rancher has always found a way to innovate and adapt. The future of beef in America will depend on their ability to do so once again. It will require a collective effort from ranchers, consumers, and policymakers to build a food system that is more resilient, sustainable, and fair. The next time you see the price of beef, remember that it's more than just a number on a receipt. It's a reflection of the health of our land, the well-being of our ranchers, and the future of an American icon. Thanks for listening to G Fun Facts Online.